The Tales series is one of the longest-running RPG series around. Known for their fast-paced gameplay and extensive character interaction, the series celebrated its 25th anniversary this year. Starting on the Super Nintendo in 1995, it has expanded to a total of 17 different games on almost every major console. Unlike the Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest games, which sequence its sequels with endless numbers or hyphenated numbers, Tales either names its games after a random noun or a made-up word. Unlike the Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest games, I personally do not have much experience with the Tales series. I played the DJAP translation of Fantasia in middle school, and I played Symphonia in high school. I do not remember much from either game, except I had a ton of fun with Symphonia's combat system. Besides these two, I have not played any other game in the series, so I went into the game without a lot of preconceived notions about the games or what to expect. Tales of Arise opens with a familiar JRPG trope, the battle against an evil empire or oppressor. In this case, the game tells the story of the twin worlds of Dana and Rena. 300 years prior to the game's beginning, Rena invaded Dana and enslaved its people. The game's story revolves around how the Renans exploit the people of Dana for their own personal gains, with the Danans being almost powerless to stop them. Enter the two main characters in Tales of Arise: Iron Mask, later known as Alphen, a Danan swordsman with no memory and the ability to feel no pain, and Shion, a Renan woman who has a curse that inflicts pain on anyone that touches her. Shion arrived on Dana with a goal to take on the Renan lords living on the planet. The two team up and travel across the lands of Dana. As the game progresses, the team meets 4 more characters who join the party for their own varied reason. Each character has a different fighting style and available abilities, so each character definitely feels unique to play. You have a traditional sword fighter, a healer mage hybrid, a pure mage, a tanky warrior, a hybrid fighter mage, and a glass cannon fighter who dies if an enemy even looks at him. The real-time battle system is one of the Tales series' claims to fame, and Tales of Arise delivers hard in that regard. You directly control one of the 4 characters in your party, and the AI controls the rest of the characters. I've had bad experiences in other games with the AI controlling characters, so I was pleasantly surprised by the AI in Tales of Arise. They are able to chain attacks together, use abilities that the enemies are weak against, and the AI healers are actually very competent. I noticed that the AI struggles a little more on squishy melee characters like Law or a damage-focused Alphen. They still have a hard time dodging attacks or staying out of big glowing zones that deal tons of damage. Then again, when I played melee characters, I had a hard time at times as too. The camera angles can sometimes cause you to get blindsided by enemies coming behind you, which can be lethal in boss fights, where bosses hit like absolute trucks. Thankfully, you are able to quickly use recovery items, and the AI healers are on point in healing and reviving. The combat is so fun and silky smooth that I had no problem with that. Switching targets, dodging, and chaining attacks together feels amazing. Each character has their own unique boost attack ability, which is normally good against a certain enemy type. For instance, Shion's boost attack can down flying enemies, while Law is great at softening up armored enemies. Even if the character is not in the battle party, you can still use their boost attack. The game also wants you to prioritize combos in order to do boost strike abilities, which will normally one-shot normal enemies or do massive damage against bosses. Those consist of building a lot of hits onto an enemy, and when the game gives you a prompt, you can unleash the boost strike ability. While they look visually amazing, you'll eventually get tired of seeing them every battle. By the end of the game, I was hearing Alphen's grunts or Rinwell's loud shrieks in my sleep. The game and the surrounding world is beautiful. The world of Dana has 5 different nations, each revolving around a different element. While the environments and the cities have different looks, the citizenry do look similar across the nations. Most of the Danans wear similar clothing, and you fight the same Renan soldiers with the same armor across the 5 nations. Thankfully, the monsters, known as Zoogles in Tales of Arise, give a good amount of variety. You get to fight such enemies as wolves, ice wolves, water wolves, dark wolves, and green wolves. The enemy variety feels sparse in the game, with pretty much the same types across the planet, with varying elemental affinities depending on the nation you're in. Tales of Arise has 6 elements: fire, water, light, darkness, wind, and earth. Each element is weak to one other element and resists its own. Each character has about 3 to 4 different elements in their repertoire, so you will normally have at least one character that can damage enemies' weaknesses at any point. The game follows a linear pattern. You go from point A to point B, fighting enemies along the way. The game does a good job telling you where to go, but each area has plenty to explore. The game rewards you for looking through every nook and cranny, as you can find cooking ingredients, items, and crafting materials everywhere. The game offers a simple crafting system. You craft your own weapons through items you find through your travels. It's pretty easy to find the weapon materials as you go through the game without needing to grind or search too hard. The other items you can craft are accessories, which come in varying types and levels. The higher the level, the more abilities the accessory can have. Later in the game, you can also transfer abilities from one accessory to another, allowing you to create a custom accessory to suit your needs. Transferring abilities takes a ton of materials, so it's something that you would be more likely to do much later in the game. With fast travel and cooking, it's very easy to gather a ton of materials to upgrade accessories once you get to the endgame and postgame content. One thing that threw me for a loop was that you do not earn money from battles. You earn money through finding it in chests or selling extra armor or materials. And trust me, you need the money. In Tales of Arise, your healing capacity is determined by CP, and the orange shells to refill your CP is a whopping 3,000 gold apiece. There are many times where I struggled to get through dungeons due to a lack of orange gels. Thankfully, the game is very cool in being able to fast travel out of dungeons and back to checkpoints at your whim. Between not having random counters and being able to leave dungeons instantaneously, dungeon exploring is an overall fun experience. While the gameplay itself is a ton of fun, my biggest point of contention is the storyline. The storyline is a pretty typical JRPG affair at first. You explore each nation in the game, learning the background and the struggles of each country. You explore a couple dungeons, watch the characters interact in cutscenes and skits, and do side quests as they come up. At the end, you fight the Renin Lord and move on to the next nation. The story feels episodic in between each nation. Besides recruiting a new party member, it does not feel like a lot happens in the overarching story. It's average, neither terrible nor phenomenal. The lords all have their own tropes and traits, but do not receive much character development. You get what you get. The actual fights are very fun, but I did not feel much emotional connection in the overall struggle of the team. My biggest issue with the story comes in at the second half. The second half drags massively. It feels slow for anything to happen at first, and the number of skits start pounding you relentlessly. Many times when I entered a new area, I was bombarded with 3 to 4 skits all at once, many times not contributing anything to the main story. It makes everything just feel slower. I have not played many of the Tales games, so I don't know if all the games have as many skits as Arise did, but it really detracted from my enjoyment of the second half. Another problem with the game comes when instead of building the story throughout the game, they start doing massive info dumps to tell the story, instead of just telling it throughout the game. I'm not a fan of info dumps, and it frustrated me in Tales of Arise, especially when they had such a massive amount of fluff and skits and interactions throughout the story. The presentation of the story was disappointing to me. Many of the reveals and twists were actually pretty good, but done in a way that did not excite me. Imagine watching The Prestige, but instead of watching the amazing reveal sequence, Hugh Jackman just gives you a pamphlet with all the plot points on it. That's how the last quarter of Tales of Arise felt to me. However, the post-final battle sequence and ending was completely ridiculous to me and ruined a lot of what the game was building up to. I'll not go into spoilers on it, but most folks who have beaten the game know exactly what I'm talking about. Now, even though there were a lot of negative aspects to the game, I do not want this review to seem like it's a bad game. Tales of Arise was an absolute blast to play. The game is beautiful, the music kicks ass, and the battle system is incredibly fun. Even with the frustrating story, the game is definitely a must-buy and must-play. It has piqued my interest in the other games of the franchise, which I am definitely planning on playing in the future.